And there were two women in their 70s in that congregation who were as liberal as anyone in the congregation, who could not bring themselves to vote for Hillary Clinton because a president should just be a man. Tuesday reminded me there's much more of this alive in our culture than I would like to admit. In 2018, my favorite theologian, Bruce Springsteen, did a Broadway show where he talked about his whole career, his life, how he got to be interested in music, what inspired him to write, the different things he dealt with. And as part of that show, he talks about the irony of his whole career. And he says, you know, I write songs about working men and women, about difficult economic times of the working class, about working class issues, about poverty and being poor, about struggling in different ways. And he says, you have to understand that I have never held an honest job in my entire life. I've been doing this since I was 16 years old. I have become wealthy and famous writing dozens of songs about something about which I have absolutely zero firsthand experience. I'm that good. And everyone laughed. But it was the irony of where he'd come from to where he'd been. But I offer that as, I get how ironic it is for this old, white, Christian guy to talk about feminism and dismantling patriarchy, but it's also that I need to do this, and so do lots of other people like me. So this is a little bit of a hodgepodge of reflections, hopefully that will get us started in the next couple of weeks of looking at that online material for the trans inclusion course around issues of gender and patriarchy and religion and binaries. I am not the world's leading authority on gender issues. I'm probably not the leading authority in the room on gender issues. I have lived my entire life identifying as male in the culture of North America in the 20th and 21st century. So that's about the only perspective from which I can reflect. But a question in our trans inclusion program prompted me to think about some things. One of the questions was, explain or go over a memory, the first time you had a conscious memory of being gendered, of you having a gender identity. And I thought about that, and I have a very strong memory of this, actually. I was 4 years old, and I checked with my mom, and she corroborated. Yeah, I was probably summer I was 4 years old. We were in Iandoli's supermarket in Fitchburg, Massachusetts. Mom was holding my hand, and she didn't have a cart. She had a little basket. I'm going to imagine we were just running in to get milk or something. And a person about my mom's size that looked a lot like my mom, the same general body shape and build, and a variation of the same hairstyle, the same kind of cut of dress and similar shoes, walked up to me, tousled my hair, and said, "What a beautiful little girl." My mom smiled. I said, "I'm not a girl." And the person kind of walked away. I'm going to imagine she was kind of doing this, but I don't know. I don't remember that part. You see, at 4, I had bright orange hair. Bright orange. You think carrot top and somebody with bright orange hair, that was me as a child. And I hated getting my hair cut. So my mom would tend to let me grow it really long down to not like down here, but like a really long kind of George Harrison Beatles cut, like well past, well onto the shoulders anyway, a lot of times. So I don't, have any problem now. I see that person probably thought I fit all the usual markers to gender me that way. I had the uniform of all the kids in my neighborhood at that point, t-shirt and shorts and sneakers. It was the middle of the summer. I look back on it now, and it's no big deal to me. But I think of that sometimes when I hear about the issues of being misgendered. That we could all laugh about mine, but that's not something to laugh about. And I remembered other things where gender started to pop into my consciousness. And the next thing I really remember as a memory about genderedness was in 1972, I was 6, a couple years after that grocery store incident, and my father had to threaten to take the city of Leominster and the Leominster Education Department to court in order to allow my stepsister, my half-sister, to enter the drafting program at Leominster Trade High School, because Leominster Trade High School is not for girls. By the time my dad's lawyer had contacted them twice, I learned since they gave up the resistance. My next lasting memory was just the next year later when I remember watching with my dad. My dad was a tennis player and coach. I became a tennis player. I remember watching Billie Jean King defeat Bobby Riggs on television. I watched it live with my dad. I remember that distinctly. I remember, but don't fully understand the difficulties of my divorced mom in 1975 not being able to get a loan or a credit card in her own name after getting divorced. I remember my mom, with my brother and I in tow, about that same time, being denied communion in public in a Sunday morning mass by the parish priest. I also remember my mom looking up at him and saying, "That's fine, we'll go somewhere where they understood what Jesus was talking about." And if you ever meet my mom, she is not a confrontational person. So this is a strong memory of mine to see her do something like this. A couple years after that, 1977, Pat Wheeler joined my Little League team. Patricia Wheeler. First girl to play Little League baseball in my hometown, 1977. 3 years after, Maria Pepe was the first girl to play Little League baseball in the United States in New Jersey. My wife Tuesday is coming to our church today, sometime after we start eating our dinner, because she's got to pick up the car. But she's got to pick up the car because she's got to go to the Episcopal Cathedral, because today there's a mass celebrating the 50th anniversary of the ordination of women in the Episcopal Church. And they've been doing this celebration for a couple of months. It's going to be a year-long celebration because on July 29th, 1974, 11 women called the Philadelphia 11 were ordained to the Episcopal priesthood at the Church of the Advocate in Philadelphia. So they'll be celebrating that today. Unitarian Universalists have been ordaining women ministers since the 19th century. We like to point to Olympia Brown as the first woman ordained and recognized by a denomination in 1863, although there were plenty of other women ordained by congregations and not recognized by the congregation's denomination before that. The number one historical citation usually goes to Antoinette Brown Blackwell, a Baptist not recognized by a denomination, but ordained by her congregation in 1853 in New York. We Unitarian Universalists can't pat ourselves on the back too much, though, because by the time the Unitarians and the Universe combined in 1961, women ministers were still extraordinarily rare. By 1980, women made up only 5% of UU ministers. We can claim recent progress, though, because today over 60% of our Unitarian Universalist ministers are women. And we have more gay, lesbian, bisexual, and trans out ministers than any recognized denomination anywhere. But this struggle continues, especially in the Catholic Church I grew up in, where that wait may go on forever. One of the things that points to that struggle is a poem I always remember, and I felt like I should share it because of what Tuesday's going to today and the progress they've made that the Catholics haven't. Francis Croke Frank's poem, Did the Woman Say? Did the woman say when she held him for the first time in the dark of a stable after the pain and the bleeding and the crying, "This is my body, this is my blood"? Did the woman say when she held him for the last time in the dark rain on a hilltop after the pain and the bleeding and the dying, "This is my body, this is my blood"? Well, that she said it to him then, for dry old men, their brocaded robes belying their barrenness, ordained she not say it for him now. If you grew up Catholic and you're a woman wanting to go into ministry, that's a powerful piece. But misogyny in religion is not reserved for Christianity or Catholicism or the Abrahamic traditions of Judaism and Islam or even Western religion. Many Buddhist schools still aren't fully open to women's leadership. Some early Buddhist scriptures tell of how Buddha rejected his stepmom 3 times when she requested to become one of the monks and be one of his followers. Religion is not the cause of patriarchal misogyny, but it is one of the all-time greatest practitioners. Religions with ancient histories such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam pick up a lot of their misogyny and patriarchy from the cultures in which these traditions originated and developed. As religion held political power as well as social and cultural power, religion's refusal to adopt to gender egalitarianism gave sexism credentials and helped keep it going strong far longer than it might have otherwise. And the election results Tuesday point to how much sexism is ingrained into our culture. I was telling somebody before service, the only thing that helped me get through this week as a minister is, unfortunately, I had to do this in 2016, follow this kind of week. So I had some resources, but I share with you a story from that year because I served a Unitarian Universalist congregation, and there were 2 women in their 70s in that congregation who were as liberal as anyone in the congregation. If you sat and talked to them, you would not think otherwise, who could not bring themselves to vote for Hillary Clinton because a president should just be a man. 2 women. Tuesday reminded me there's much more of this alive in our culture than I would like to admit. And it's partially up to me, as a male-identifying person, to knock that down. So I start to do what I can and do more. As we travel through this year, learning how to be more inclusive of trans and non-binary people in our congregation, we're going to deal with the long stain of patriarchy and sexism. And our culture is still so steeped in that. It's important to understand that culture is the powerful overriding factor, I think, in this. As they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think we saw that Tuesday. And culture also eats reason and facts for lunch and dinner. It's an emotional issue, culture. Our study this year is going to have us reflect on gender and gender binaries before we go into reflecting on trans identities. Mary Zabroska says, gender studies asks what it means to make gender salient, bringing a critical eye to everything from labor conditions to healthcare access to popular culture. Gender is never isolated from other factors that determine someone's position in the world, such as sexuality, race, class, ability, religion, place of origin, citizenship status, life experience, and access to resources. Beyond an identity category, she says reflecting on gender means focusing on structures that normalize and discipline gender across historical and cultural contexts. Now, in a sense, this seems like common sense, I think, to a lot of us. Yeah, that makes sense. But I think gender has so many implications that never consciously occur to most of us. It has layers that kind of need to be peeled away. So I invite you to think for a couple minutes about a couple of things. Think for a moment about babies born intersex. 1.7% of the human population is born with sex characteristics of both sexes. They are almost always surgically altered as infants to be one sex or the other, according to what the doctor thinks makes most sense. So it'd be easier on the parents and the child growing up to match a gender. In our culture, we practice genital mutilation of infants as a natural course of events, leaving people to deal with that legacy of who they are and what their body is their whole lives. Gender is powerful, and it's something that's created. Because it's something that's created, it can be recreated differently. You know? We deal with intersex babies out of an unshakable, persistent cultural norm that there are only two binary genders. And that those babies' existence point to the fact that there's a complete variety between very male sexual characteristics and very female sexual characteristics. And there's a scope in there. Because someone is intersex does not mean they are exactly one thing or another. A wide variety of different things. Think for a minute about marriage equality. It's justice and equity in terms of moving the institution of marriage out of a heteronormative lock and privilege. But what about other varieties of human relationship? Usually related to gender. Why is a two-person monogamous relationship a model? A lot of that model is also related to gender and men owning women. Why can't poly-marriage configurations be legalized? Why is marriage necessary as an institution? I don't say this just to be oppositional, but there are lots of things as we peel away layers that are influenced by how our culture visualizes and promotes and sees and acknowledges gender. In her 2010 book, Delusions of Gender, How Our Mind, Society, and Neurosexism Create Difference, Cordelia Fine, who's a research assistant, says that much of the gender difference in neurology, their research is deeply flawed. It's also dangerously misleading. Women are not worse at math than boys and men. Girls and women's preference for girlish and womanish things has more to do with social expectations and actually what's in their neurology. Virtually all of the science about the neurological gender differences between men and women is faulty, virtually all of it, because the science itself was so conditioned by the gender norms in which the science and experimentation took place, that it's just in the last 10, 20 years that it's really started to change. You know, if people still believe girls are intrinsically bad at math as they're growing up, those people aren't even going to get to the starting gate of studying transgender inclusion, which means it's more important than ever that we do. So for the next couple of weeks, I invite you to ponder gender and gender binaries with the Transforming Hearts Collective in session 2 of that program. Check out my website and blog at tonylorenzen.com for even more resources that will open your mind, touch your heart, and inspire your spirit.